Hello everybody, this is Fun Police, and today I'm making a very quick video, hopefully, that is just talking about the balance preview that came out yesterday, just giving my thoughts and what changes I think are good, and maybe some changes, and my thoughts on changes that either are missing the mark, or maybe certain things that I wish were included in this balance preview. So let's just not really waste any time. I don't want to ramble on about stuff. So starting out, the general changes, healing and camouflage, I think an overall fine nerf, so they're not as like instantly activated after combat. The smoke runs are getting standardized, that's fine, whatever. And then the howitzers getting a health buff. Really like that because howitzers kind of suck right now. Like, they just die to an off map. Like, if anybody gets vision on them ever, they get nuked from orbit, or like a Nebelwerfer kills them. Like, it was not worth it. So I hope that this makes them a bit more relevant. Moving on to the US forces, rearm and retrofit, fine change, makes it more useful with light vehicles as they're wanting here. I think that's fine. Engineers are getting a nice buff, giving them more utility and making it easier to get one if you need like a flamethrower. Riflemen pour it on them. They're getting essentially a bug fix, which is nice to see. Designate assault position, which is part of the advanced infantry battle group. This, wasn't really something I saw a lot of people using, so a little bit of buff to make suppression resistance. I think that's fine, maybe makes it see a bit more use. The Spec Ops Mark vehicle is getting essentially a longer duration and a huge health increase, so anti-air can't instantly kill it. Overall, this really got overclassed by the anti-infantry loiter, so I'm happy with it getting some improvement. Then we have the free fire drills, which is this ability down here against the off-map rapid artillery barrage. I think this seems like a pretty significant buff, and I hope that maybe this becomes a bit more usable with howitzers being stronger. If this allows the artillery to fire an extra time between barrage cooldowns, that'll be a significant buff, and I think make it a lot more appealing to go for. You never really went for them because this was such a good off-map ability, but maybe if howitzers are better, this will be used. Ammunition storage, buffs across the board. Yeah, people weren't really using the artillery, the ammunition storage. Like, it just died so easily, and it was costing you fuel and whatnot. It was just too much effort for what it gave. So now it pretty much is just buffed across the board. Hopefully that makes it useful. And then infantry assault, which is getting a cost reduction and a CP reduction. This competes with the Ranger weapon training, but I still think that this buff is not really tackling the issue. And this is my first thing that I wish would be changed. And that is the infantry assault. The units that are spawned from it, in my opinion, need to be not giving any XP to the enemy. The problem with infantry assault, in my opinion, is that you're spending all these munitions and whatnot, and all these squads are giving free XP to the enemy. Like, they just get like a buffet of free XP that is just making their units stronger. And I think that's a real problem, because why do that when you could just make your rangers like Supermen and have really strong abilities? So if any change were to happen, I would prefer infantry assault to be like, these units don't give any XP, because it makes it easier to throw them in as cannon fodder, which is what the ability is kind of meant to do. So the only change on the US list that isn't there that I think should be there is something to be done with the Hellcat. Right now, the Hellcat got hit with a bunch of nerfs at the same time that the late game of the Axis got buffed. And I think that is part of the reason why the US is still not performing very well in larger games, in that it was really relying on stuff like Hellcats to bring up its late game, and all of that got nerfed. And I think that now they're lacking a clean solution to the late game of the Axis, especially when it comes to something like a Tiger. They don't have a good, clean way of even trying to engage it. So in my opinion, there's two things to be done. Either one, undo part of the nerf to the reload speed. The reload speed essentially got about a half a second slower, and maybe that could be partly undone. Giving it like a quarter-second faster reload could make it shoot a bit faster and be a little bit more useful. Or it could maybe benefit from a range increase. Right now, its range is larger than that of a medium tank, about 5 range farther. But if you look, it's actually, I think, ever so slightly shorter than that of a Tiger. So maybe the Hellcat could instead get a range increase going out to about 50 meters like the Tiger does, and that might be a little bit more useful, allowing the Hellcat to better brawl with these, medium tanks while not having the ability to, like, literally sit there and slug it out. They could play that hit and run style a bit more with a bit more range, maybe. Moving on to the Wehrmacht, there's only 3 changes here, and I think this list is missing out on a couple important changes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But for these 3 changes, I really don't have any issue with them. Grenadiers, their merge getting a cooldown, I think is reasonable. The 2.5-ton cargo truck is this thing in Breakthrough, which nobody ever used because it was a munition point that cost fuel, or a munition cache. This change is kind of whatever. Like, I don't actually really like this. It's just a mobile cache. I think it's still very boring. And I hope that Breakthrough overall gets a rework here, because I think it's a bit bland at the moment compared to, like, the revamped Mechanized, Luftwaffe, and Italian. It feels like it's a bit outdated. But I guess it's fine for now. And then Call to Reserves was this thing in Coastal where people were just going bulwark because it was easier, and bunker spam's really powerful right now. So they're trying to make Call the Reserves better. But let's just quickly jump into game, because I got like 3 or 4 things that I think really need to be addressed in relation to the Wehrmacht. I have 5 suggestions that I would be adding onto the Wehrmacht list in order to round out some of the more problematic edges that the Wehrmacht is still having. The first and most pressing one, in my opinion, is related to the snare that Grenadiers have. I've already done this in a previous video talking about the balance changes, but let's just go over this again, because it's still not on here, which perplexes me. But this is the regular range of a snare. 15 range is the bog standard for all units. Commandant? Grenadiers are special. They have about an 18 range snare at Vet 0. At Vet 1 currently, this increases by 5 up to about 23. And then at Vet 3, it increases again up to 27 range. Just by looking at this, I am at max zoom of normal mode, and you can see it's covering the entire screen. This is massive. It's super large, and it's, I think, a huge issue that currently exists, because Grenadiers are just too good at zoning out vehicles with their snares. Even 23 range is very massive for the fact that it's happening like 4 minutes into a game. Like, it is not hard to see this in the first 5 or so minutes as the first light vehicles are hitting. It's so massive, and I think that it is a real issue that needs to be addressed. I think the big cause is the bonus range to the Panzerfaust that is happening at Vet 1. In my opinion, I would like to see this entirely removed, only leaving the bonus range at Veteran C3. Or maybe move that to Vet 2, tweak the balance as needed. But in my opinion, 23 range should be about the maximum range that the Grenadiers reach with their snare. They don't need to be going above 25 range with snares, and I really think that they don't need to be getting range boosts at Vet 1, because it's just happening too early in a match, and it makes zoning vehicles too difficult of a challenge, or too easy of a task for the Wehrmacht player. You can't play aggressive with light vehicles like the Humber, because, well, they're going to take a high damage Panzerfaust very easily, and then they're going to be critted and left for dead against whatever AT the Wehrmacht player has gone for. I would really like to see something done about this, because I think it would make the Wehrmacht have a far less powerful grip on the early game by making it so it's easier to make use of light vehicles against them. Then, moving on, we're going to talk about the Italian Coastals, which has 2 changes that I think need to be made. 1 nerf and 1 buff. The nerf needs to come down on the anti-tank bunker. The anti-tank bunker has currently no pop cap, but exudes a unique specialty in that bunkers normally don't have a way to damage vehicles. The combat bunkers of things like the MG42 or medical, repair, command, whatever, all those bunkers don't have the ability to actually damage enemy vehicles, meaning that something like a Crusader or any medium or light tank normally is able to freely kill these bunkers if they're unsupported. which provides additional counterplay to them. However, the AT bunker, by being relatively cheap, spammable, and having a pretty monstrous 60, or actually that might be 70 range, it's just too much. And it's especially problematic because this entire area that it is overwatching, you can't even use your medium tanks to, like, fight enemy mediums in. It's a 1-2 combo that, like, one AT bunker in the middle of a map can be extremely hard to push into unless you just nuke it from orbit, because you need off maps in order to kill this bunker, as otherwise you can't just use tanks in its vicinity. I would put like 4 or so pop cap on these. They don't have to be massive, but if it had a little bit of a pop cap, building and spamming these in the numbers that people are doing in team games would be far harder, and I think it would overall tune down this whole bunker issue by making it so they're more vulnerable to tanks, because you can't spam the AT bunker, and that in turn makes it easier to focus down the couple that are out there and then push in with tanks in order to overwhelm them. On the buff side, I want to see a change to the rapid fortifications. Rapid fortifications is kind of garbage. You have a bunker that builds in 15 seconds on its own for 150 manpower, but why not just have your infantry build bunkers? Why would you be spending a CP point and giving up that really useful Overwatch ability for what is essentially a one-time bunker that still needs to be upgraded? I just don't understand it, and I think that this ability is wholly useless and just really never worth taking at the moment. And as this whole patch seems to be trying to make weaker battle groups have, like, their effects be a bit more powerful, I'd like to see this reworked. Maybe, for example, if you wanted this to be a little more unique, maybe it could be like an activated ability that boosts the build speed for a set amount of time. You know, you pay like 40 munitions and you get 50% more build speed, for 20 seconds, making it easier to, like, win a fight, activate it, and throw up a bunker real quick. Maybe that's something that could be done. But currently this doesn't feel like it has any purpose. Now, moving on, we're going to talk about Panzer Grenadiers. Panzer Grenadiers are, simply put, overtuned in terms of their bundle grenade. They just really don't have the ability to, like, it's doing too much damage, even if you're reacting to it. So we're going to just do this quick test. So I'm going to throw this bundle grenade right at this squad. And as soon as this bundle grenade reaches the air, I'm going to turn it to the enemy, and I'm going to try to react and run my squad away from it. Now, keep in mind, I think this is going to be a test that is trying to show, like, a fair reaction time if you're off doing something else. So, like, let's say I'm in my base moving squads to try to move forward, and I hear the grenade call out. In that instance, I'm going to try to move the enemy squad, or move my squad out of there by reacting to it. So, switches to enemy. There's the grenade. We're going to move. And you can see, literally, if I move when they call grenade, they nearly got wiped out. Like, it was very possible this squad would have been entirely wiped. And this is just way too overstrong, way too powerful and punishing for players. I would just honestly outright re-nerf the bundle grenade buffs. They didn't need it. Revert it to its old version in the 1.5 version, and I think it'd be totally fine. It doesn't need to be a nuke like it is. And then the final change we're going to talk about is related to the Flak 38 emplacement. I simply think this needs a cost or a health buff from 600 to 720. Currently, emplacements are a bit undertuned. They have a high pop cap, they're easy to kill, and the only thing that the Flak 38 really has going is that compared to the Bofors, it's cheaper. But in my opinion, I think raising the health would move this into a reasonable position where it's useful, but not too powerful. And the Bofors should then also be made very much more closely related to the Flak 38. And let's see if we can make these emplacements useful and then tweak and change things from there. On the British forces, there are more changes that are planned to come out, although I think some of them are misguided in what they are trying to accomplish, and need a bit of refocusing. So let's start out. The Requisition Steward unlock is getting a fuel decrease. That's fine. Stewards are a little underused. This will make them a little bit easier to get access to. Not much to say. Now, the 6-pounder, the Crusader 6-pounder gun conversion, essentially Crusader 3s are getting a penetration increase by 40. This will make them far more reliable at penning vehicles at closer ranges. Even like mediums and whatnot will pretty much always be penned by the Crusader 3 now. However, in my opinion, the problem with the Crusader 3 is more so that it has a fairly steep munition cost, and you're doing that in order to get a 600 health vehicle that has to dive in order to be effective. I don't think the Crusader is... This is the change that will help the Crusader. In my opinion, a health buff when they get the 6-pounder upgrade would be a more effective way to give the Crusader some meat behind it. Having 720 health instead of the 600 it does now would make it so it has the same health as seeing things like Panzer IVs and whatnot, which would help to make it that when it dives in, it is able to trade a bit more effectively. Right now, people aren't just going for Crusaders, and it's not because they're not penning, it's just they don't win the fights against other medium tanks, especially when you're spending 80 munitions per medium tank. It's just not a worthwhile upgrade right now. So in my opinion, a health buff would be better than penetration. Foot guards are getting a straight damage increase. They're essentially dealing about 20% more damage, which is because more or less they're 4-man SMG teams because the bazookas eat up models. And this is a fine change if you're wanting to buff foot guards in this way, although in my opinion, I would rather foot guards have like a cost reduction. Like we saw Stoss Troop drop in price, and that was a pretty effective way to make Stoss Troop better. I had been hopeful that foot guards had maybe got a similar price decrease, like going to 380, maybe 370. Stuff like that and whatnot would have been, in my opinion, a better way to take this, but I guess it's fine overall. Now, the biggest thing that I have an issue with, the Requisition Grant unlock. The fuel price is going up another 15. I think this is the wrong way to do this. In my opinion, the grant is just too cheap for what it's doing at the moment. Grants sit at 90 fuel, which is cheaper than a Panzer IV, yet the grant heavily overpowers the Panzer IV. Like, it is kind of ridiculous, a head-on fight. The Grant is almost unbeatable outside of, like, a Panther. And in my opinion, what needs to happen is the Grant needs to go up in cost itself, because adding delays into the teching means the first Grant is slower, but subsequent grants are too cost effective. In my opinion, if you're going to keep the current grant's performance, then the grant needs to go to like 100 fuel and probably get a nudge in manpower cost as well. It should be costing like a premium medium tank if it's going to be a tank that is better than regular medium tanks. And right now it is cheaper. So I really think that that instead of making the tech costs more, or more so trying to rely on that, if you slow down the tanks, the Crusader or the grants themselves from being so cheap, you overall will have an easier time reeling their power in because it's harder to get a critical mass of them. The next change is the supply run from the Australian battle group. Essentially, they're shaving some manpower cost and they're making it a bit faster. Not bad changes overall for the battle group. But I do think one issue is that the supply run is dealing with just... It gives too much to the enemy. Like, you're getting punished, I think, a bit too much if you end up, losing it to them. In my opinion, a buff that would have also been nice to see is maybe the enemy doesn't get the whole fuel or munitions if they manage to intercept it. Like, if they only got, like, say, 60% of it or something like that, that would have, I think, been a little bit, that would help it as well. Because right now, it's just extremely high risk when you try to do a supply run, and if the enemy kills it, they get, like, 40 fuel for free. So these are not bad changes. Like, I'm happy to see these, but I also would have wished to have seen maybe, like, just a little bit less resources given to the enemy, because it's very punishing if you lose it. The Indian Artillery War Cry is essentially swapping places with the Valor ability, which is reasonable. Valor is just a straight passive buff, and nobody's picking Warcry, so they're trying to make it so, like, if you want the passive buff, you have to delay Gurkhas, but the Warcry can be used with Gurkhas, and, I think that's fine. Uh, but now there's a couple things that I also think need to be talked about that aren't getting changed. The most notable one, I think, is related to the Air and Sea battle group. I think, simply put, Air and Sea is suffering because its commandos are getting worse and worse. And I would personally like to see some buffs to both commando units so they're a bit more capable. Uh, Commandos themselves are suffering because camo is steadily and gradually being nerfed down and down, and it's making it harder to get right on top of enemy units and ambush them. So I personally would like to see maybe commandos could get like a small boost at their like sort of mid-range DPS. I don't want to say mid-range, more so like range, like 10 range or something like that. Like, not like point blank, but still close range, because commandos drop off a cliff, and I would like to see maybe they have a bit more bite for a little bit larger of a range. So they don't have to get literally on top of stuff to kill them. And then the commando LMG section, I almost wonder if maybe this just needs a small price decrease, just so it's a little more cost effective to work in, because it's hard to work in multiple elite units, especially when one is a 4-man squad that like isn't exactly like Staustrup levels. Uh, but if this gets a little bit of buff, I think it would help the Air and Sea battle group. And then the only other change, I think, is the Australian battle group, which I also think needs a few changes. Notably, the Bofors anti-air emplacement, I think, needs a price decrease. Currently, it sits at 35 fuel, and that is very expensive for what it does. It's essentially the same as a 20mm flak gun, but that is just cheaper. And the only benefit is the Bofors technically has more health. In my opinion, as I talked about previously, I'd like to see the 20mm flak get a health buff to the same as the Bofors, but then I would like to also see the Bofors come to match the price of the flak 20mm, essentially allowing it to where you have both of them be more or less the same, just to see if they're worthwhile, and then we can balance from there. And then the only other thing is Hold the Line. Right now, Hold the Line, I think, is just not as effective as it needs to be. It just really can't compete with vehicle over repair. And I think one thing that it should maybe a consideration would be, maybe this could be where you buff up the emplacements. Like, maybe this could give like a flat health boost. Like, off the top of my head, maybe it gives 80 additional health to British emplacements, so they're more durable, and if you lean on it to like have a really strong like defensive, you can use Hold the Line to passively improve your emplacements by making them tougher, and then have the ability that also can be useful. But yeah, really the main thing, as I talked about, is the Grant really needs to cost more. I would like to see the Crusader changed, and then there's a couple other abilities that we just talked about that I think need changes. Then the final series of changes is related to the Africa Corps. DAC is pretty much just getting a very small amount of changes. The Goliath is getting a very small buff. The 8-rad commander mode is being nerfed, which is a bit sad because like the 8-rad had really good scaling, but I can understand like maybe this is a bit too much. The Italian Sound the Alarm is getting a buff. This is the Sound the Alarm ability, which is 1 CP, or 2 CP at the moment. It's going down to 1. And then Propaganda War, which is also in the Italian battle group, or the Italian infantry, is going down in munition cost. Overall, I think most of these are fine changes. I don't think DAC is, at least right now, in need of desperate overhauls, especially because the Italian Combined Arms was mentioned that it would be reworked here in the near future. Like, they're going to do a bigger shuffle up of this, so, this would be the one that I would point to as needing changes, but they're already supposedly working on that. Maybe the only thing in Battlefield Espionage is I hope they fix the Incendiary AT, because Like right now, the bonus damage to like anti-tank grenades just isn't working. Like it's still bugged, and I hope that gets fixed. And maybe there needs to be a buff to the disruption operation. I don't know. I don't see a lot of people use this over Firestorm, but it of course it might have it might have a bigger impact for higher end players and might be fine as is. But yeah, so that is pretty much my thoughts on the changes. So pretty much I'm mostly happy with how DAC in the US are looking. I think most of the changes are reasonable. I hope that there's some smaller adjustments there, but I do think that the Wehrmacht is not receiving the nerfs it needs. Like, there's a handful of nerfs that I really hope are put into it in order to bring it down a bit more, because the Wehrmacht's got some really egregious things at the moment. And I also hope that the changes to the British can uh, be changed in certain ways. At the very least, the grant should be just costing more, at least. Like, I really want to stress, I think the grant is extremely overtuned at the moment, and it's good that they're trying to make the other options more appealing and more capable in the late game, so the British aren't crutching on the grant as much. But and the grant is just so powerful and it's so cheap. I hope that this is revised and changed to like a more to something that more significantly impacts the critical mass that builds up. But otherwise, that's just it for the video. If you've watched all this, let me know your thoughts. Have you looked at this? What do you think on it? Have I missed something? Or do you like the changes they have in here? Do you not like them? Just, again, let me know in the comments. Also, make sure to like and subscribe for more future content. And otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and have a good day.